And Senator Waters.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hi, folks. Can I start with the National Assessment of Chemicals associated with coal seam gas extraction in Australia, which I'll just refer to as the National Assessment from here on in. When are we going to see the results of that? I had thought that they were due to be finished last year. Can you update me on that?
Senator, the advice provided by Nick Nass was that that project was expected to be completed by the end of 2014. It's proven to be quite a complex project with a number of areas where methodologies needed to be developed before you could take the next step. So our expectation is that it's not that far away. It will be delivered in 2015. It may well be delivered by the middle of the year, but there has been some delay.
Sorry, it may well be by the middle of the year?
Yes, that's my guess, but it could well be wrong. It needs to go through a number of processes, including peer review, and of course it needs to be agreed by government for release as well.
Sure. Given the increasing complexity, was there any additional funding allocated to complete that national assessment?
No.
Okay. Can you tell me why the impact of coal seam gas on underground water resources wasn't included in the original scope of that project?
So that's because the initial work that needed to be done was in the areas where the major risks were seen. So that's the water on the surface and close to the surface, where you could have major spills of major chemical release, and also a lot of the conceptual modelling that needed to be undertaken had to be done first for the surface and top layer of groundwater before you could do deeper water modelling. So it's going to be done after this project, but it's not part of the original project.
Right, so it will be done in a future project, but the assessment of chemicals associated with coal seam gas, many of which are blasted down through hydraulic fracking,
it's a key component of the bioregional assessment, so they will need to undertake analysis of what happens to deeper water as part of that. So it will be undertaken in the bioregional assessments, not as part of the chemicals project that's being headed up by Nick Nass.
So when you do the bioregional assessments, and I understand they're underway and I've got some more questions about those, will the impacts of chemicals be then considered as part of that study?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
So you're saying you're not looking at the impact of chemicals on underground water, on aquifers, because you're looking at aquifers in a different study, the bioregional planning. When you look at those bioregional plans, when you prepare them, will you then consider the impact of chemicals from CSG on underground water?
So, Senator, what we're looking at in the bioregional assessments at the moment is the methodology about how we might take the work from the chemicals assessment project and extend it into the deep groundwater in the context of the bioregional assessments. So that's an issue.
So you're not looking at something in the first study, but you're going to use that absence, that failure to look at something to determine whether and how to look at it in the second study?
Well, we will. So, as my colleague indicated, our focus of the chemical assessment is first on the areas where the literature and other evidence pointed to the biggest risks. So that goes to the surface, where you've got the prospect of large spills in high volume undiluted chemicals, and also exposure to workers. So that's the focus of that work. But what we've learned from that work, we're looking at how that might inform further work in the deep groundwater in the context of the bioregional assessments.
Sure. Just when you say how that might inform future work, just want to know, in those bioregional assessments, will you look at the impact of fracking chemicals on aquifers?
Well, that's what we're considering, how we might do that now.
You will, but you're just working out how?
Working out how.
Okay. Do you mind if I just keep going, Bill? I've got heaps. You'll have your go. Okay, so sorry, Bill.
That depends. Now, are you pursuing the same line of questioning?
I agree with you, but the policy seems to me to be a make good after the event policy. I mean, it's too late after the contamination's occurred.
Well, as I said, Senator, the focus of the work is where the risks...
Which is the point I'm making.
The risks are deemed to be the largest.
But the point I'm making is it's too late when it happens.
Sure.
And Senator, obviously your question is a policy question.
But no, it's more serious than that.
Let Senator Birmingham
Yeah, right,
finish, please.
I better go away because this is really bad stuff.
We will get there.
This is
Can I
bad
come back
stuff.
to the usage of chemicals, just as my first tranche of questions? Has either the existing national assessment or are the future bioregional plans going to consider the impact of mobilising underground contaminants from fracking, those naturally occurring, BTEX carcinogens in the geology?
So that's an issue that's out of scope for the chemicals assessment, but some of the work being done in the chemicals assessment may inform future work or the need for future work.
So when you say may inform, is that a yes, you will do that work in future, or not sure yet?
Well, the assessment's not yet final, Senator, so it's difficult at this point to be conclusive about what comes next.
Okay, so you're not planning on doing that future work right now?
Not
but
right
as
now.
a result of the study, an issue which is out of scope of the study may well somehow be decided to have had future work done on it.
It may inform that,
Even
yes.
though the contamination is potentially underway.
Well, I've given the details, Senator, of what the current work is.
Senator Heffernan, Ms Milnes is attempting to answer
It's a
questions
scientific bluff.
she's attempting... Senator, take argument with the policy all you want. Ms Milnes is responsible...
Policy, it's fact.
Ms Milnes is responsible for bodies of research that are being conducted. You may not like the fact that those bodies of research that all approvals aren't on ice until every bit of research under the sun is completed.
I am aware,
but Ms Milne is simply trying to answer questions about that research.
But I am aware that there is no legal responsibility in the system for what could happen. There is no legal responsibility, and if there is, you tell me right now, because there isn't. Once they seal the bloody well, the legal responsibility ends. Explain to me if it's any different.
Senator,
It's a stake through the heart, mate. The answer is there is no legal responsibility in this mining regime once the well is sealed. And what we're talking about here is researching after the damage is done.
I was intending on getting to those issues as well, so I might continue. So given that we've had approvals having been rolled out for the last 5 years for enormous coal seam gas projects, and of course now other unconventional gas projects are starting to roll out as well, has your section, or has ISK or anyone that you're associated with in the Water Division ever advised the Minister about our lack of knowledge about potential contamination?
So, Senator, the Independent Expert Scientific Committee's advice on development proposals would point out some of these issues, so it might, and it has done on some occasions with respect to hydraulic fracking, and that information would be provided to regulators and taken into account in their decision making.
So ISK has it, hang on Bill, just let me speak please. So ISK has at times said, hey, we don't have enough info about fracking contamination, and yet you've got a study about fracking chemicals that is now not considering their impact on aquifers. So how does the identification of a knowledge gap by ISK in the past, we're still not having those knowledge gaps addressed right now, how is the system helping us to get better information?
So there are examples where the Independent Expert Scientific Committees provided advice on projects that's included hydraulic fracturing, and where they've pointed to the need for the proponent to do further work on their risk assessment, and pointed to management and monitoring outcomes, for example, that regulators should consider. And perhaps if I...
There is no obligation on anyone in the process to take any notice of the Independent Expert Scientific advice. There's no obligation, you agree?
Well, perhaps if I pass over to my colleagues in EACD...
No, I don't agree, Senator Heffernan, but I'll let Mr Knudsen perhaps
You
add
can't
to that.
force it.
Senator Heffernan, can you just let the witnesses answer the question,
This
please?
is really annoying.
Yeah, be that as it may, do them the courtesy of allowing them to answer, please.
Dean Knudsen, First Assistant Secretary of the Environmental Assessment and Compliance Division. What I would want to bring forward, and Senator Heffernan, I'm happy to provide additional information on this. You're talking about the specific risks to water courses posed by coal seam gas projects. What we do...
Talking about the contamination through the geological fault line, through
Understood.
the repressurisation of one aquifer against another. That's what I'm talking about.
So in terms of the assessments that we've undertaken on individual coal seam gas projects, which already have their approvals in place, those approvals require the development of water monitoring and management plans. We can walk through what each of those plans required at each of the, in sometimes 3 stages for some of the projects, which dealt with an exhaustive process of water monitoring to make sure that we understood what was happening with respect to the water resources. That also required, or the approval process also required ecotoxicology analysis to be done of the fracturing chemicals so that we knew what was being proposed to be injected into the wells. Combine that with the monitoring system, that's where we had the robust analysis to ensure that in terms of impacts on water, they were seen as being acceptable in terms of a level of risk.
With great respect, that's bureaucratic claptrap.
Okay.
Right, I'll go back. I mean, if it all turns to custard, old mate, no one is legally liable. Can you explain to me anything different?
If there's been a material breach of a condition of an approval, then the proponent is liable
Go and do your
under
homework.
the EPBC Act.
Okay, Senator Waters.
Thanks very much. So given that there's these huge absence of knowledge gaps, and you've said that you've issued the approval and then as a condition of the approval you require the proponent to answer the question, even though they already have their approval, how is that consistent with the precautionary principle?
The way the approval conditions work, Senator, and I'd be happy to walk through specific cases or provide those on notice, would be that in advance of certain actions being undertaken by the proponent, there's various stages of requirements that have to be met before those actions can be taken. So the way that we specifically designed the stage 1 and 2 approvals on the water monitoring and management plans was that before a consequential impact could happen, there had to be certain actions taken to ensure that the level of risk would be appropriate. I would also turn to my colleague, Mr. Gaddis, if he would like to add a little bit more on that.
So, Shane Gaddis, Assistant Secretary Compliance and Enforcement Branch. You may recall, Senator Heffernan, we've discussed this at the committee before, and I've tabled the requirements of the Stage 1 and Stage 2 water quality management plans.
Queensland, as you will remember, the science was not in.
Senator Heffernan.
And the cumulative impact wasn't considered, and Anna Bligh owned up to that. She didn't even read her own leaflet.
Senator Heffernan, I think perhaps a little more respect for the Senator and the witnesses, please.
So the Stage 1 water plans primarily deal with early warning indicators, so they deal with the inability to draw down certain aquifers until we have an idea from the companies about the amount that they can draw down before it'll be a problem for the EPBC listed springs. So if you recall, most of the projects in Queensland are linked, and the requirements and the conditions are linked to the EPBC listed springs. There's 7 or so of those. The second stage of the plans deal with a lot of the groundwater impacts, and they'll deal with the requirements of the need for baseline data, groundwater drawdown threshold values. One of the points that you made, Senator, was about the exceedance response plan and what would happen if the companies detected an exceedance. The plans have to deal with all of the things that they would do if they had an early warning indicator, a groundwater indicator that indicated that they'd gone past the threshold values for ecotox, what they would do to mitigate and repair any damage caused by that activity.
Please explain to me where the science points out.
You're in trouble, Bill.
The geological... No, I'm not.
With me?
I'm worried, yeah, with you. I'm not with the argument. The geological fault lines, right? That contamination, not the well contamination or the... I'm not so much on the... or the fracking material. Some of the fracking materials are a lot safer these days. But please explain to me, like the Walloon coal measure and the Springbok, how do you make good that?
So you're talking about
Who makes good?
ground aquifer interconnectivity. Is that the issue you're talking about? So there's a range of...
science is not in on that.
Senator Heffernan, can you let the witness answer your question, please?
He knows where I'm going.
Yeah, indeed, but doing the
So
courtesy.
another one of the conditions requires the companies to go through and do a schedule of aquifer connectivity studies and monitoring of relevant aquifers. So some of the work the companies are doing in combination with the Queensland Government and the groundwater impact area of the Queensland Government is to do pump tests and to try to attempt to figure out where the interconnectivity issues occur.
They've issued the three licences, 40,000 wells, 700,000 tonnes, which they've now reduced to 350,000 tonnes of mid-granular salt a year, and we haven't got the science in.
It's your government, mate. Get them to stop approving everything.
Well, can we just, actually, Senator
If I can
Heffernan,
ask a few more questions, that'd be
finish
great.
your questions, and then you're welcome to ask your regulatory question.
Thank you. So I likewise had a follow-up question for you, Mr Geddes. Given that the stage 1 conditions require monitoring, and if they notice drawdown, they then have to fix it. My issue is, how do you know you can fix it once you've started to make connections between aquifers and coal seams? We have no confidence, based on the science that still needs to get finished, that you can actually fix that, given the pressure involved. And secondly, that monitoring is being done by the proponents themselves. How can the community have any confidence that that modelling and that monitoring is accurate and independent?
So the modelling, the monitoring data goes into the Office of Groundwater Impact Assessment, OGIA, which is a Queensland statutory authority. They collect the data from the companies and they run the models. So there is an independence there.
Well, the data is collected by the proponents, though.
Not all the data is collected by proponents. They use a range of different methods. So they use some of the wells that are already in place for the Queensland Government. So there's a range of different methods that are used throughout the process. So
if you could take on notice for me, given the time, what proportion of data collection prescribed by those water monitoring and management plans is done by the proponent, and what proportion is done by people other than the proponent? That would be instructive. I might just move on. I had some questions about ISC advices on particular projects. If I'm able to get through them, we'll see. So let's start off with Santos. Can you walk me through the key findings of the ISC advice on the proposed Santos coal seam gas expansion in Queensland?
Sure, Senator. So your question goes to advice the ISC provided in late December, 18th of December. So I think the key issues that the committee identified go to reduce water supply to groundwater dependent ecosystems, cumulative impacts of the Surat and Bowen Basin activities, hydrological and ecological consequences of surface water discharge, and potential changes to the groundwater and surface water quality. That advice, Senator, is available on the website in full.
Thank you. I have read it. I'm just interested in the gravity of those conclusions. That sounds like a pretty dangerous proposition to me.
Well, I guess the key point is that they're potential impacts, key potential impacts. They don't necessarily talk about conclusions. So they're key potential impacts, and there's advice provided in response to each of the questions asked by the regulator.
That still doesn't reassure me. That's the whole point of doing an impact assessment, is to identify potential impacts. When the identification of those impacts goes to reduced water supply, cumulative impacts on 2 different basins, hydrological impacts on surface water, and changes to groundwater quality, how on earth are we approving these projects? Perhaps that's a question for the Minister.
Senator Waters, I think your if not verballing the summary Ms Milnes gave, going very close to it, in that she has summarised the topics of the potential impacts that are discussed in a very detailed scientific report.
It's not that detailed, it's only 12 pages long.
Now, you're of course welcome to take the contents of it and use it as you wish, Senator. But I just caution against taking a statement where essentially Ms Milnes has given what you might describe as the subject listing of subjects covered in the report of what the impacts are that are discussed within it. And then saying that means that they all automatically lead to some horrific, they all automatically lead to horrific consequence.
I might suggest that you have a read of it because it is pretty scary stuff.
Could you let the minister finish, please? You're cutting across him.
No, he had finished.
Yeah, only after you cut across him.
Well, I think the minister's suggesting that I'm verballing the 12-page ISK advice. In fact, it is as scary as it sounds, Minister.
You were verballing Ms Milnes. You're welcome to, as I said, use the report as you wish.
Well, I suggest that I was not, and I think Ms Milne was confident in her summary of the advice, which clearly she and I have both read, and I suggest that the decision makers might like to have a read of that as well. Can I ask whether or not the identified gaps in the ISK report will be required to be fixed before the minister makes a decision on whether to approve this expansion? Anyone?
So Senator, going back to your earlier point, the advice the committee provides goes to the regulators for their consideration now, and it's for them to then determine how they pick up the points that are raised.
Yes, and
by
that's
the
what
committee.
I'm asking.
So
are they intending to fill the knowledge, and are they intending to fill the gaps identified?
So over to my colleagues.
We were trying to run an orderly hearing here.
To try and answer both sets of questions, every time we've received IESC advice, it has been taken into account by the decision maker, and it will be the case for this project as well.
And will you be requiring further studies to be done by the proponent to address the knowledge gaps ISK identified?
As we do for every project, Senator, we'll be assessing the risks associated with the project and determining what information is required to ensure that an informed decision is made.
So not too sure yet whether you'll ask them to do the studies ISK suggests
It'll be determined through the process of our assessment. Senator, I'm not in a position where I want to get into that level of specificity on this project. It's not at that stage.
Can I move quickly to the Galilee water project?
What do you do with 350,000 tonnes if it's reduced back to less than 700?
Senator Heffernan, you can have your turn in a second. Can we just let Senator Waters finish, and then we'll come to you.
Thank you. Can I turn now to the Galilee water project, which is that huge project in the Burdekin, proposed to suck out 700 million litres of water from rivers in the Cape to feed Galilee Basin coal mines. Has that been referred to ISK yet for their advice?
I'm not sure, Senator. I'm just struggling with the name of the project. There are a number of projects that the
Galilee
independent
Water, it's called.
Well, that's not listed here as one of the projects that the committee's considered. They sometimes have a range of names,
Can I
though.
just check, Mr Newton, has it not been referred to ISK yet?
It's been referred to the department, but
Yes.
it has not been
Hasn't gone
referred
to
yet
ISK
for
yet.
advice from the IESC.
I imagine that it will, though. You anticipating
If
that
it's
it will?
deemed to have a significant impact on a water resource, but actually this is a dam, is it not? Yeah, so it is not within scope for the IESC. It's got to be a coal or a coal seam
True,
gas
even though
project.
it's feeding a coal mining project?
No, it's not, but it's not a coal or coal mining or
Okay.
coal seam gas project.
Presumably
Senator.
because of reef impacts, and therefore it still won't go to ISK, will it? Yeah, okay, interesting, thank you. Quickly moving to Chenois, given that the ISK advice on that particular project was issued in, from memory, May of 2013, which was both prior to the water trigger taking effect and prior to some changes to the project parameters, will the relevant decision makers be asking ISK to reconsider that project?
Senator, on that particular project, there was a request for IESC advice prior to the water trigger being introduced into Parliament. That request was withdrawn from the committee. The minister at the time wrote and requested that it be withdrawn. We then reissued a request for advice, noting that the water trigger was before Parliament for its consideration, and that be taken into account by the IESC in providing advice on that project. That was done.
That was still done back in May of 2013,
That's
though.
correct.
So my question is, given that the effluxation of time and the change to the project parameters, will ISK now be required to go back and reconsider the changed project?
Again, Senator, as we do on every project, we'll take a look at the IESC advice. We'll take a look at what sort of gaps in our information that we have and deem whether what sort of actions we need to take to make sure that there is an informed decision.
It's getting pretty late in the process, though. I mean, approval's due in a matter of weeks. I would have thought that you would have made that judgment about whether further ISC advice is needed already.
And again, Senator, the timeframes around this, my colleague Ms. Stagg will provide additional detail on this, but at this point, we're in the process of, we've just received the state assessment. We're now in the process of doing our own assessment of that. That will then lead to a determination, which we often are in a position where we have to stop the clock and ask for additional information. That may be the case on this project, but we haven't yet reached that determination.
So can I just confirm that the approval deadline is, I had the 17th of March in my head for some reason, but is that the correct date?
Right. It's the 13th of March, Senator.
13th of March, subject to a potential stop with the clock provision to possibly seek further information from ISC.
Or anyone. We're not preempting particular decisions yet.
Not at all.
You're talking about different things that could be in decisions or different decisions that could be made. We're not preempting any of that. The proper process is underway, and that'll be those things will be taken into account.
Okay, I guess my question is, when you're 3 weeks out from an approval decision deadline, how likely is it that you're going to ask the ISC to reconsider an almost 2-year-old water advice?
The decisions that are
surely you would have done that by now if you were going to do it. You're saying you haven't yet made that judgment whether to do it or not?
On some projects, Senator, you'll be aware that the timeframes under which the Commonwealth makes its decisions are fairly tight. They're stated in legislation, and sometimes we find ourselves near the end of that assessment process and determining that, on balance, we don't have enough information and therefore seek that. But that is determined on a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
Give me an indication of how much longer you want to go.
Yeah, probably only another 5 minutes.
Okay, we'll just, we do have some other senators who'd like to ask some questions this evening, so if you get to be as quick as possible.
Yeah, thank you, I will do. So can I just clarify, with those stop the clock provisions, I'm conscious that you can use those to seek further information from the proponent. Can you use those same provisions to seek further information from ISC? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's genuinely on the table. ISC may yet be asked
We can stop the clock
that.
to seek information from a range of areas. Sometimes we'll stop the clock to await the outcomes of a judicial process or a state consideration that's relevant, for example.
If I could just go back to the progress of the bioregional plans that ISC was undertaking. In response to some earlier questions, you said that it's actually not ISC that's doing those bioregional plans anymore. It's a combination of, and I think I jotted it down correctly, the Office of Water Science, the Bureau of Meteorology and CSIRO. Since when was ISC not doing its own bioregional assessments? I thought under the National Partnerships Agreement of 2.5 years ago, it was ISC itself that would do that work. When did that get farmed off to other agencies?
Oh, perhaps I could just clarify there. I think the bioregional assessments are being managed by the Office of Water Science, and the work is being undertaken by CSIRO, the Bureau of Meteorology and Geoscience Australia. That's always been the case, Senator, and the role of the Independent Expert Scientific Committee, as set out in the legislation, is to provide advice on the bioregional assessments. So not necessarily to do them or undertake them, but to provide advice on that. Okay. And we expect that the Independent Expert Scientific Committee will be one of the key users of the bioregional assessments.
Thank you. Was there a change between the National Partnerships Agreement and the legislation which changed the nature of that involvement of ISC?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator. That's how we've proceeded.
Thank you. And if I could just have one final question in relation to the National Water Commission. I'm aware that they used to prepare some very useful fact sheets, including on the water impacts of coal seam gas. Given the diminished capacity of the Commission, although thank goodness it does still exist, I'm wondering which agency would now be fulfilling the role that NWC used to in looking at the overall impacts of coal seam gas. So I'm not too sure if that's one for you or for the folk down the end.
Senator, I believe it's the department will take on that role.
And is there any particular resources that have been dedicated to that task, or is that something that existing staff have had to take on without additional capacity?
Well, I think as far as there are resources, the resources that are in the IESC that the department services and supports, because ultimately, you know, the work you've been just asking about is work that's made public. You've just quoted from, waved around one of the IESC reports. These are these are the authoritative views on the matters you're asking about, not necessarily a fact sheet that the NWC or somebody else might put out.
The different purpose was ISK obviously advises on specific projects and feeds into the bioregional plans. But
no, it does more than that.
But NWC did the overarching, effectively, survey of the field. What do we know? What do we not know? And you said that the department is now doing that work, but then, Minister, you said that no ISK is doing that work. So I'm just confused. Is there anybody doing that work, and if so, whom?
ISK is serviced out of the department.
Sure, but are they doing that work now? Because that wasn't my understanding of their work scope.
The Office of Water Science has already released, I understand, a number of research papers which go precisely to that question, where they have commissioned a state-of-the-world piece of research on what is known, what is not known, and that work is published. To Gail, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. A number of the research pieces that have been released, and indeed the chemicals assessment that we spoke about earlier, do include a review of literature and state of knowledge internationally as well as domestically.
Okay. And just one final question on that. Do they determine their own research scope, or do they respond to the Minister's request for particular research projects?
So for the Office of Water Science, its focuses on the water-related impacts of coal seam gas, and the research priorities. The Independent Expert Scientific Committee provides advice to the Minister on research priorities, and the priorities that the Office of Water Science is implementing reflect those recommended by the ISC.
It's driven by the Minister via the ISK to... Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.